Okay, I welcome you all with love. This little journey I'm going to take you on, cycles of global warming and cooling, started in a very non-political way. My wife, who's a little heat sensitive, was concerned that maybe Al Gore is right. It's just going to keep getting warmer. And here we are in Arizona, in southern Arizona. It was like, maybe we have to move. So I said, I will look into it. Not for political reasons, not for, just, it's very personal. Are we going to have to move or not? Now, I'm a person who's a pretty strong environmentalist. We actually have lived off the land with 2 children for 3 years. No external water, no external electricity, and no external plumbing. So I'm really into off the grid. The center that I'm talking about now, which is in Patagonia, Arizona, we are completely solar. And our water is completely solar. I drive a completely electric vehicle. So the message I'm giving is one with a lot of environmental sensitivity, living the lifestyle since the 1970s. It's okay, so I'm very committed to real environmentalism and really living it. Now, my background, I am not a environmental scientist per se. I've published papers in biochemistry and biophysics, in psychopharmacology, in school health, and have made over 13 books on spirituality and nutrition. So I have a background, obviously, in how to look at things scientifically. And that's what I've applied to actually looking at what's happening. And we have theory, and we have what I call the actual living planet. So we're looking at 2 levels, theory and also, well, what's really happening. When you have a patient, you want to know if they have a fever, you take their temperature. That's another level looking at it. And so what I'm going to share with you is what I discovered, and you can use it whatever way you want. I have a concern, because my granddaughters are 9.5, 12, and 13, that we not scare our children and we not scare our grandchildren. And so it's important to kind of see this whole picture and then make clarity of decisions. It appears like in Australia, my wife is from New Zealand, but we have friends in Australia. It's like, well, is this caused by global warming, or is it caused by what some people report, according to the Australian police, 200 different arsonists? And then we'll call it global warming. So we have to be careful not to use every event as, oh, it's global warming. And you'll see why I'm saying that. So let's go on this journey and see what we see. So first, it was really hard to figure out what's going on. So we have the word cycles. Now, Al Gore talks about linear. Boom, it's just getting warmer. But if you look back in history, which is good to do, and this is a chart of cycles of global warming and cooling. And clearly, in the 12th century, it was warmer. But then what happened? It got cooler. And then what happened? It got warmer. And then cooler. Up and down, up and down, up and down. Here we are at year 2000. We've gone through global warming, and now we're going into a cycle of global cooling. So cycle versus linear is really worth understanding and seeing. Now in this chart, it looks like cycles of global cooling could be basically 2 degrees centigrade approximately, and that's 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's just an idea, but please get the idea, historically, it's cycles of global warming and cooling, not a linear. First point. Now this, we're going to go back a few thousand years. And this actually is a little concerning to me Because again, the cycles of warming and cooling are there, but this is 27 degrees cooler, and we're really looking as much as 36 degrees cooler going into a global cooling stage. That is more serious. We don't know how cold it's going to get, but we are in a moving into that global cycle starting in around 2019. So let's keep in mind it could really be as cold as 36 degrees Fahrenheit cooler. Okay, so that's a concern, but hopefully it will not be there. Okay, so first point, we are looking at warming and cooling as cyclic, not linear. That's one of the biggest fears. It's just going to get warmer. Well, we've already started global cooling. So macro patterns are of, again, global warming and cooling, not such as Al Gore proposed of a linear pattern of just endless increasing warming, secondary to industrial age. Now, if we go back and look at this picture, we're talking 500,000 years ago. We didn't have a lot of industry then, okay? And we go back further and we see that the 12th century, we didn't have a lot of industry. So we automatically take us to a place where we're saying, global warming and cooling isn't related to human activity. Something else is going on. So I took that and kind of went with that and try to see, well, who's got this figured out? So, and what we see obviously is these cycles show that man-made carbon dioxide is really negligible impact on the global warming and cooling cycles. No industry, so we can't really blame it on human industrial world. Now, we have gone through, for the last 50 years, but really before that, cycles of warming and cooling. And the climate alarmists are, I'm going to say, 0 for 41. Now, I'm not going to give you all 41 predictions because I just want you to get the flavor of what was being said. So in 1969, Stanford University person, Paul Ehrlich, said that we'll disappear in a cloud of blue steam in 1989. Didn't happen. Oh, in 1970, they were worried about an ice age, and they thought we'd have an ice age by the year 2000. Also, that didn't happen. 1976, scientific consensus, planet cooling, famines, well, it didn't really happen, did it? 2005, Al Gore talks about Manhattan underwater by 2015. Oh, that didn't really happen either. Now, in 1978, we're still worrying about global cooling, and they had no insight to a 30-year global cooling trend. So I kind of have to look at it as a scientist and say, well, nobody noticed there's cycles of global warming and cooling? It's like as if this is new information. Okay, it's like, what happened? Why don't we see the obvious? So 1988, Maldive Islands will be underwater by 2018. Well, guess what? They're not. Rising sea levels will obliterate nations if nothing is done by the year 2000. That was 1989. And basically saying all the coastal cities are going to be underwater. Obviously, that didn't happen. New York City's West Side Highway, underwater by 2019. Well, I've been there, 2019. Didn't happen. At 2000, children want to know what snow is. Well, as you'll see, snow last year, 2019, is actually gone to much higher levels. 2002, famine in 10 years if we don't give up eating fish, meat, and dairy. I've been a live food vegan since 1973. So I would have an invested interest in trying to make that point. But the truth is, as scientists, I can't make that point. It's just not true. Okay? There are many reasons to be a vegan. And I give a talk called Holistic Veganism. I give it lots of reasons. But global warming and cooling isn't one of them. Okay? 2004, Britain will be Siberia by 2024. Not quite. 2008, climate genius Al Gore predicts ice-free Arctic by 2013. And you'll see some pictures. Not quite. In fact, just the opposite. The ice is increasing. 2009, climate genius Prince Charles says we have 96 months to save the world. Not quite, because we're not going to save the world. We're going to make the world a better place to live. 2009, UK Prime Minister says 50 days to save the planet from catastrophe. What do these statements do? They create fear, they create anxiety, and again, for my grandchildren, it's like, who aren't in fear and anxiety about this, let me say that, because they have a grandpa who's kind of saying, no, let's look at reality, don't worry about it. But they're creating fear and anxiety. And there are people at different ages who are promoting this fear and anxiety. Why are they doing it? I don't even want to speculate, because we can look at different reasons why they're doing it, but it doesn't help us. Let's just understand what's happening, and then you can go from there. So the goal here, let's just understand what's happening. And they're called cycles. Okay, 2014, 500 days, less than 2 years before climate chaos. Not really. 1970, world will use up all its natural resources. Not really. Oil gone in 10 years. 1966, not at all. So people just seem to get into this extreme, whether it's global cooling or global warming, mini ice age, or we're going to boil to death. And I'm not sure what it is, like creating a horror movie. But guess what? It's not a horror movie. God is taking care of us. We're going to make it. We do need to apply some common sense to it. We need to kind of deal with the anxiety and fear that's there, and we do need to take appropriate precautions, for sure. So, in June 1989, the environmental alarmist, again, alarm, but we don't have alarms, switched their attacks against the baby boomers to warn and terrify them that it was no longer a new ice age to be afraid of. And get it. No, okay, we'll give up that thing, but now it's global warming. And if the world will end in 10 years. So we've heard that. The world's not ending in 10 years. That was in 1989. The world, it's just not happening. In practical reality. Fear-based reality, yeah. Alarmist reality, yeah. But we have to actually have kind of science-based reality. And you'll see in a moment, the majority of scientists really don't support this. In 2006, the alarmists further warned that because of global warming, the world would end in 10 years. Well, 10 years would have been 2016. Well, obviously it didn't happen. In my research, trying to sort this out, trying to understand the cycles, I came across the work by a retired NASA scientist named John Casey. And he developed what I call the relational cycle theory. And it's a relationship with the sun. Okay, and he looked at historical data rather than linear man-made computer warming models. And as made it clear, that have been 100% inaccurate, whereas Casey's predictions have been 90% accurate. So what's his theory? Basically, global warming and cooling is related to the number of sunspots. More sunspots, more global warming. Less sunspots, more global cooling. And you'll see in a moment, historically, the truth of that. It's also related to the rotation of the Earth's ellipse around the sun and the axis shift. But the big thing is the sunspots. So, what the relational cycle theory posed by Casey is pretty straightforward. He postulates climatic and geological manifestations on the Earth are a result of solar changes in sunspots. That's it. There's lots of other sophisticated things, but this is the driving force. So, again, I mentioned it's 90% accurate versus the anthropogenic global warming. Us humans just aren't that important in the world of global warming. We're just not. And again, I'm a vegan. I can make an argument for a vegan, and yes, 21 to 54% of the global warming gases are related to meat eating, animal agriculture. That's fine, but that's less than 1%, 0.004% of global warming causes, okay? So we got to put it in perspective. So climate change is not really based on greenhouse gas emissions. That's what he's saying. Contrary to his 90% accurate, the Gore anthropogenic global warming has been consistently misproven. Now, as we look at the cycles, we went out of global warming in 1998. Now let's think things move a little slowly. But it was marked by a decrease in sunspot activity, which is exactly what we're saying. Less sunspot activity, more global cooling begins to happen. And here's his points. Casey's relational cycle. This kind of I'm going to call it the RC. Global warming ended in 1998. The sun hibernates every 206 years. This is totally proven stuff, okay? Hibernates means less sunspots. This solar hibernation is marked by historic and cyclic reduction in the sunspots, energy output, and number of sunspots. In other words, in solar hibernation, we move into more global cooling. And that's exactly what's going on. It predicts a global cooling, mini ice age, starting in 2019-2020, peak in 2030, and moving towards global warming again in 2053. So it's about roughly a 33-year cycle. And this has been going on for a long time. You saw the initial charts of warming and cooling. It's well documented. This is not a computer image. It's actual measurements. It's what we call, as a doctor, as a holistic physician, clinical. There's the clinical results. You want to check somebody's temperature? Take their temperature. Okay? And now what's happening is an increasing amount of astrophysicists, geophysicists, paleoclimatologists are studying the sun's role in climate change. And they're examining the role of number of variations in distance from the sun, correlation of sunspot activity with global warming, cooling, respectively. So in other words, more people are beginning to pay attention. And so we started in 1998 this trend of global cooling, as if we're in the sine wave curve. We're just now, 2020, which is when I'm giving this talk, we're just now entering into that cycle. But is this new? Is this just me sitting here in Patagonia, Arizona saying? No. Members of the Russian Academy of Sciences have openly stated as early as 2007 that we're entering a new little ice age. It's Russian Academy. Well, that's worth saying. And in 2017, 58 peer-reviewed papers have basically begun to support the science of the global cooling happening. Note, the anthropogenic global warming, no papers have been peer-reviewed and published. 58. So that was a little bit more of a turning point. And they're just not people from the United States or from the UN, China, Russia, US, Italy. They're all looking at climate change from their regions in timescale. So this is a bigger picture, and we're getting a bigger global consensus, okay? So this is obviously disproving the theory, because theory have to be supported by actual fact. That's the hard part of that. So, and there's a growing number of scientists who don't support Gore's AWG theory. So in 2019, and it's more scientists by now, 31,487 scientists signed the global warming petition, basically disputing that global warming is happening. And there is an increasing number of American scientists who agree no evidence shows human beings are heating our planetary atmosphere in any significant ways that affects global tension. Now, that's, again, I want to say, that's 31,487 scientists concerned enough to say, us humans aren't doing it. More is going on. Even the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which is how I'm going to use it in the future, predicts a sea level rise of about 17 inches by 2100. Okay, and right now NASA's observation is that the sea is rising at 0.134 inches a year. That's very, very little. 2008, Al Gore, the climate genius there, told the German audience that the entire North Pole cap will disappear in 5 years. That would be by 2013. But as you'll see, there are pictures showing that even by 2013, it's increasing in size. So basically, a major study in the journal Nature Geoscience found that climate models were faulty. And as one author put it, we haven't seen the rapid acceleration in warming after 2000 that we see in the models. So there's a problem. So the University of Alabama at Huntsville showed that the Earth's atmosphere appears to be less sensitive to changes in carbon dioxide. Remember, carbon dioxide is less than 1% of the global warming gases. So now we're going to look at graphs that help us get a feeling of sunspot activity from the year 1600 to the year 2000, because that's key. What it shows is less sunspots are directly associated with reduced global temperature. That's the bottom line. So in the 1800s, we have the adult minimum, which is where there's a lowest number of sunspots. And that was a key. And if you remember, poor old Napoleon, he didn't actually check with the climatologists, and he chose to invade Russia around that time, and he got frozen out. And year 1650 to 1700, there was the Maunder minimum, related to number of sunspots, and drops in global temperature. So there are cycles. These are real, and we can see them. So this is the number of sunspots. You can see that there, and you see they go down, then they increase, and then they go down. This is global cooling, this is global warming. This is global cooling, and that's what destroyed Napoleon. He didn't quite get it right. And here we are, warming, cooling, warming, cooling. So the graphs, the historical graphs, what I call the clinical evidence, is very clear. We are in cycles of global warming and cooling, and as you're kind of getting, I guess, we're moving as of 2019 into global cooling. So now in 1816, that was known as the year without a summer, because we really hit the global cooling part. So understand, it really did happen. So the NASA even has said, this in 2011, that they confirmed that the solar hibernation, which I've explained, is a decrease in sunspots, was indeed happening, and therefore confirmed what John Casey had predicted in his studies. In 2011, the scientific suggestions were that there is a drop in the ocean temperatures, again confirming it. The Hadley Center, University of Alabama, remote sensing systems, 2008, showed there's a drop of about 1 degree Fahrenheit. And then they observed 0.588 degrees centigrade. Again, it's about 1 degree Fahrenheit. okay, between January 2007 and January 2008. So we see the drops, and then other scientists have come up with similar numbers, about 1 degree. So we are in solar hibernation. That helps us because we have to adjust to this if we're going to protect ourselves. Okay? And again, it's very parallel to the solar hibernation. It took place between 1793 and 1830 with the mini ice age. Now, again, we go clinical. How do we go clinical? What are the temperatures? We can argue as much as we want. Let's look at the temperatures. So I'm giving you a few examples. The truth is I had a lot more, but for this presentation, I cut it down. So January 11, 2010, Miami, Florida, record cold temperature of 37 degrees Fahrenheit, breaking an 83-year-old record set in 1927. January 21st, 2011, International Falls, Minnesota, a new record cold of minus 46 degrees Fahrenheit, beating the old record, 1954, when we were in global cooling and people were thinking, we're going in a mini ice age. 41 degrees. That was, it broke the record. In 2011, Sweden reported its coldest weather in 100 years. Now, I don't know why the people in Sweden are following this kind of thing, that getting in anxiety and fear around global warming when it's not happening, and they're even predicting getting colder. Polish weather experts predicted Europe and Russia will have to endure the coldest winters in 1,000 years. So something's going on contrary to the fear and anxiety that's promoted in the news and by teenagers and things like that who don't have that background. Pravada, Earth is on the brink of an ice age. Well, hopefully it won't be at 27 to 36 degrees colder. That's actually of great concern. We know in ice ages, historically, there's been more disease. You can't grow crops so well, particularly in the northern areas like Canada, northern US. That's a concern. We have to pay attention. I'm going to give you some recommendations at the end because this is about taking care of people. I'm thinking my grandchildren, okay? I'm thinking everyone's grandchildren, everyone's children, and for ourselves. We got to understand what's going on so we can do the right moves ahead of time. The Register, 2008, Arctic ice refuses to melt as ordered. Obviously, who tried to order it? Well, you know, Gore, okay. Global warming, it's the coldest winter in decades. That's the Express, another newspaper. 31,000 scientists saying no convincing evidence. So it's gathering. So Greenland ice glaciers growing as climate alarmists go into mass hysteria that defies real world measurements. And this is the point. You think somebody has a fever? Take their temperature. Okay? The fact is the North Pole ice cap is increasing in size. That's just the clinical evidence. We have to look at that. And you're going to see some pictures in just a moment. So initially, one of the largest glaciers on Earth that was shrinking, because warming and now cooling, is growing again as March 2019. The Arctic ice melt. 7 years ago, Al Gore predicted the Arctic would be ice-free. And by 2014, it was obviously wrong. In fact, the ice caps increased in size by somewhere between 43 and 63%. Okay, what about the polar bears? They're going to disappear. Well, we've got a problem. The problem of population of polar bears has increased from in the 1960s to 5,000 to now 20,000 at this time. Now, that's not politically correct, and there's a problem, and people have lost their jobs over it. So I say 5,000, 1960, now we got 4 times more. They're supposed to disappear. So Susan Crockford, an adjunct assistant professor at University of Victoria in Canada for over 15 years, wrote a book and a paper, The Polar Bear Catastrophe That Never Happened. Think about that, because that's exactly what we're saying. the global warming catastrophe that never happened. Well, in 2017, her lectures were set down, and according to her, I can't get into that debate, she was fired in 2019 because her work didn't fit the global warming narrative of polar bear population decreasing. So, some places they're allowing science to flourish a little bit. Obviously, she loses her job when she actually studies polar bears and shows that they're increasing. Okay, May snowstorm in Minnesota breaks a 117-year-old record in May 19th. And in Duluth, Minnesota, we have a huge, again, increase in snow compared to the second most. It was 5.5 inches in May 10th, 1902, and now May 8th, 2019, 8.3 inches. And that's what we're looking at. So those people that said kids aren't going to see snow, I think they just maybe don't know what snow looks like. Because we got plenty of snow. Highest CO2 levels in 3 million years still don't budge global temperatures. Official climate change narrative collapses in the face of real science. Record snowfall hits Moscow. February 2019 kills one. Korean Times, cold wave spikes power demands to unprecedented levels. This is happening worldwide. Bangladesh, another spell of cold likely from Sunday. Sierra snowpack is measured at 188% of average, and that's very recently. So we're getting lots of snow. First snow in 50 years paralyzes southern Morocco, January 18th, January 30th, 2018. First snow in 50 years. Colorado got almost 2 feet of snow on the first day of summer. So clinically, we are seeing what's happening. And clinically, the earth is cooling. The water is cooling, we're getting more snow, and the temperatures are going down. Baton Rouge, these are, warm places. Shatters record low temperatures Wednesday morning. As Al Gore said, North Pole ice cap falling off a cliff. It could be completely gone in summer as little as 7 years. And that was in 2007. Obviously, that hasn't happened. One of the largest glaciers on Earth that shrank is growing again. That's the point. The greatest 2-year global cooling event just took place. That's February 2016 to 2018. Where the global average temperature dropped at least 1 degree. So all this is kind of going on in a variety of places. Madison, Wisconsin sets a daily record low of 23 degrees below zero, 2019. And it gets cold up there. Saturday morning to January 26th, Dubuque, Iowa, and Moline, Illinois set record lows of minus 20 and 22 degrees respectively. Again, clinically, we're getting global cooling. Worcester, Massachusetts tied its daily record low of minus 6 degrees, 2019. Muskegon, Michigan set a record low of minus 12 degrees in January 2019, topping the previous record of at the same date of 5 degrees. So clinical. California snowpack at 160 degrees of average, its 4th highest ever. May snowstorm breaks 117-year-old record in Minnesota. Chicago sees its biggest snowfall late in the season. I appreciate that snow. I remember I used to live 2 blocks from Lake Michigan, and we used to play with the icebergs in the 50s. At that point, people were worrying about global cooling. It's not fun to be hit by a wave in the middle of winter and you're running from one piece of ice to another. It gets really cold. So I appreciate that. 2011 National Ocean Temperature Study showed declining ocean temperatures. So the evidence is there. 2011 NASA, temperatures are declining. Contrary to Al Gore's claims that it's melting, Antarctica has gained ice at a rate of 112 billion tons of ice every year. Seems like a lot to me. That was from 1992 to 2001, and now it slowed a little bit to 82 billion tons of ice gained per year up through 2008. So even the United Nations has been forced to accept the Antarctica's increase in ice. Okay? Greenland's glacial ice sheet is stable and growing, contrary again to predictions. So you'll see in a moment, ice cap images also suggest a global cooling effect. It's an obvious, you'll see, obvious increase. So what we see here is this is 2012, right there. It's big, but this is a lot bigger. So 2013, we're looking at a 43 to 63% increase. So ice cap is increasing. It is not decreasing. We just have to look at that and kind of understand, again, the clinical reality versus, computer projected realities. So we have this idea of 43 to 60%, 63%. And so we have theory, but we have clinical reality, and that's what we have to go on. That's what I go on as a holistic physician. Take somebody's temperature, check their skin. Well, if they're breaking out in hives, I can't say they don't have hives. They're having hives. It's not that complicated. 2005, Journal of Glaciology reported that Greenland ice had grown by 11 billion tons each year from 1992 to 2002. Polar ice caps were predicted to melt in 2008. They're not there. In fact, they've increased by 409 square miles, about 26% since 2007. Again, this isn't generated computer models that can be played with. This is scientific observation, the clinical observation. We have to kind of count those as a much deeper level of reality, because you can do anything on a computer and make any model look like it's happening. Take the temperature, look at the skin, see how the body is functioning, palpate. I mean, this is just hard clinical science. And then we have kind of mind-bending propaganda. 97% of scientists agree. I need to debunk this because it gives you an idea of what's being pushed. So it's a very misleading number. This consensus percentage came out of somebody's thesis. He sent out a survey to 10,257 international scientists. 3,146 responded. He selected of that. This is not good research, 79 people for further interview. And he wasn't content with that, so he only selected 77 from the sample, declared them experts. And of those 77, 2 were excluded. So basically, 75 people agreed that this is the consensus. And these 75 scientists make up 0.001% of the 7 million scientists in the world. In other words, not very many people. That's not a consensus. And it's certainly not a counterweight, those 75, to the 31,487 scientists saying there's no evidence to prove global warming. No evidence to prove global warming. 31,487 scientists. That's what we're looking at. So this 97% figure is very disingenuous. It's fake. Okay? And guess what? Even the American public, only 27% of the population believes there's a scientific consensus on it. So it didn't work anyway. Now, there is also, besides the 31,487 scientists, there was a global warming petition and the Heidelberg appeal, where 400 scientists signed it, and again, overruling that. And there another petition, 1992, 4,000 scientists, including 72 Nobel Prize winners from 106 countries. So clearly scientists are speaking up. and expressing real concern. Now, after Greta Thunberg gave her highly emotional, fear-based statement to the UN, that day or the next day, 500 scientists and professionals in climate and related fields sent an urgent message to the UN. What's their message? There's no climate emergency. Don't listen to a 16-year-old girl who has no basis at all, but is in a state of fear and anxiety. It's not the way to make decisions. And here's what else they said. Climate scientists should be less political, while climate policy should be more scientific. Okay? So we can't have this fear-based stuff. Further quote, it's cruel as well as imprudent to advocate the squandering of trillions of dollars on the basis of results from such immature models and maybe immature people. Current climate policies pointlessly, grievously undermine the economic system, putting lives at risk and countries denied access to affordable, continual electoral power. This is very real, and we need a. These scientists were very thoughtful, obviously, in their response to the Greta Thunberg emotional, non-scientific kind of base. Well written by somebody. The 500 scientists signing the declaration end it with this. We urge you to follow a climate policy based on sound science. Underlying theme is not on emotions, not on fear, not on anxiety. Realistic economics, and a general concern for those harmed by costly but unnecessary attempts at mitigation. Global warming and cooling is not caused by humans, primarily. Very small percentage, less than 1%. They go on. Scientists should openly address the uncertainties and exaggerations in their predictions of global warming, while politicians, which would be nice if some people like AOC would pay attention, should dispassionately count the real benefits as well as the imagined cost of adaptation to global warming, and the real cost as well as the imagined benefits of mitigation. And there's just so many sciences come out in different angles. The European Foundation in 2012 released an insightful paper that included over 100 reasons why climate change, get this now, is natural and not man-made. Now you've seen it now. I've showed you a perspective of 500,000 years ago. We've taken a look back to the 15th century. We see climate cycle change, and industry wasn't playing much of a role then. And here's some of their points. And this is kind of a little bit of a summary. There's no real scientific proof that the current warming is caused by the rise of greenhouse gases from human activity. Man-made carbon dioxide emissions throughout human history is less than 0.0022% of the total carbon coming out of the Earth's surface. After World War II, there was a huge surge in recorded CO2 emissions, but global temperatures fell for four decades, 1940 to 1980. Temperatures fell when we see, even though carbon dioxide is increasing. Again, hardcore clinical science. Throughout the Earth's history, temperatures have been warmer than now. Philip Scott, amateur professor of biogeography at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, says, what's he say? Climate change is too complicated, multifactorial, to be caused by just one factor, whether CO2 or clouds. It's like there are serious scientists out there all over the world saying some really good things. Now, this is Professor Plimer, Professor of Geology and Earth Scientist at the University of Adelaide, this is Australia, states that the idea of taking a single trace gas, CO2 is a trace gas, not like oxygen and nitrogen, accusing it and finding guilty of total responsibility for climate change is an absurdity. So, in a non-political way, the scientists are looking at this, this is crazy. This is absurd to talk about CO2. Can we think, maybe we should think of a better way to scare people or create anxiety in young kids and teenagers. The world's not ending, folks. Sorry. And more than that, we're not going to boil and evaporate away. We are actually in global cooling, and after 2053, we'll move into global warming, and it's time to stop scaring people and think reasonably about what's going on. So today's CO2 concentration of about 385 parts per million is very low compared to the Earth's history. Some people feel we have a carbon deficient atmosphere. No scientific or statistical evidence whatsoever that global warming will cause more storms and other extremes. That's another myth. Everything is on global warming. Researchers who compare and contrast climate change impact on civilizations found warm periods are beneficial to humanity and cold periods are harmful. And that's actually my concern, is that cold periods will have more disease, will have more famine, and will indeed have food shortages, just as the beginning. So we got to pay attention rather than thinking global warming when we're actually in cooling. So the IPCC, they say climate change contributes to global burden of disease and premature deaths. But again, clinical evidence doesn't say that. It shows that higher temperatures and rising CO2 has helped the global populations increase and been associated with less disease, which has been the case throughout history, throughout human history on this planet. So a proper analysis of ice core records from the past 650,000 years demonstrates that temperature increases have come before. And these temperature increases have not resulted from increases in CO2. Because remember, they didn't say it, but we're talking about solar spots, sunspots, okay? But they preceded the CO2 increases by up to 800 years. So CO2 just isn't a big player. So let's look at the data again. I mean, this is called the clinical thing. CO2 is 0.04% of the atmosphere. That's not a lot, okay? And man-made is only 3.5% of 0.04%. In other words, 96.5% of CO2 is naturally occurring. So it's like, you're going to say that's the cause of global warming? And as the scientists said before, it's absurd. In other words, the man and animal CO2 is negligible in the actual effect of global warming during a global warming cycle. So it's good to sit back and say, okay, we see that we've been duped and we've been pushed into fear and anxiety. Again, I'm thinking children, the young children and teenagers. It's like, you've been duped. And people have been given scripts to give to you. But they are demonstrably not true from a scientific basis. So, as I said, 21 to 53% of global greenhouse gases come from animal agriculture. And if you look at global greenhouses, which is less than 0.004%, it isn't significant. Again, I told you I'm a vegan. That's a good argument, except it's not true. It's not a problem. So we look at global atmospheric gas composition. And you look closely, that little white thing is the CO2 thing. This is nitrogen, this is oxygen. It's nothing, okay? And that little white thing includes argon, neon, hydrogen, helium, and methane. So we're making a really false case. Now, one of the reasons I'm doing this, I didn't start out doing this for any other reason is to look at whether we have to move or not from Arizona. Because if it was going to get hotter, Arizona was not the place to be. Actually, the truth is, it's really the place to be in this world of global cooling going on. It's really the place to, And I'm looking at the cycles, and to me, it's a little concerned that we could be somewhere between 10 and 36 degrees Fahrenheit cooler. That's a lot. So that takes me to the summary. Reliable data shows temperatures throughout the U.S. are now slightly cooler than in 2005. And that's both the U.S. Climate Research Network and NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They did some really good work, and they set up 114 centers, okay, around the U.S. And what they found, that was in 2005, they found there was slight global cooling since 2005. That's important because that's, again, you got a patient, you worry about a fever, take their temperature. Don't give a computer model what their temperature should be, okay? So here's my conclusion. Global climate change is cyclic. I think you got that point. According to actual measurable global climate change. We measure it. And temperature history over past thousands of years, going back at least 500,000 years. The cycle of global climate change changes preceded the industrial age, and they're not generated by human-caused CO2, created by the industrial age. So all this stuff that people are shutting down electricity, this is very dangerous, it's going to hurt many people, and hopefully people will wake up in time not to do these disastrous things. For thousands of years, historical global climate change has been about cycles of warming and cooling. Cycles, not a linear line, getting worse. With more negative aspects for humanity being associated with global cooling. That's my concern. Okay? Global cooling could potentially take us into a mini ice age, beginning in 2019, we're 2020 now, going through 2015, 53, where we will again go, according to the graphs for the last thousands of years, we'll go back into some global warming. The bad news about global cooling, and this is my biggest concern, is crop failures, food shortages, people from northern climates being displaced, moving from cooler climates like New England down to central and lower areas in the U.S. So, as I said, Patagonia, Arizona is going to be an optimal place to be versus Canada and northern U.S. And again, this thing actually did happen. The migrations happened in 1850, the year of no summer. So it's potentially a destructive cycle more than global warming, which creates a lot of greening, and it could affect our survival. So what are we going to do? You know, why am I saying this? Again, you've seen physical temperatures, you've seen glacial increases in size and weight, increased polar bear numbers. Global cooling is real, and we got to pay attention. During the last cycle of global cooling, as I said, Canada and northern U.S. lost the ability to produce food. Now I'm going to say again, lost the ability to produce food. Wow, we better pay attention to that because generally most of us need to eat. And it could be a calamity if we're not paying attention. And even in 1974, when they were concerned about going into an ice age, the CIA, Office of Research and Development, warned of this possibility of famine. So it's not a new idea. Now what to do? Now you've seen the thing, it cycles, we're in global cooling, okay? Make sure we have a lot of warm clothing. No small thing. Make sure your homes are well insulated. No small thing. You know, we live in a rammed earth house. The walls are that thick, and we have to look at a little bit of insulation that way. Optimize organic resources. Temperature-controlled greenhouses. That's probably the biggest concern, where we're going to get our food. We are interested in building some more temperature-controlled greenhouses here. I'm patiently waiting for a really good organic, veganic farmer to show up before I do this, because it's more than a little bit of work, and we feel our greenhouses will supply food for the whole community, but still need somebody to run it. So make sure your food resources are covered. Make sure you're connected with people who do greenhouse growing. Because if we go minus 36 degrees Fahrenheit, that's a big deal. And so we're looking at solar-run greenhouses, and greenhouses run with tubes going into the earth core to a certain extent that will provide kind of in-house warming without having to do electrical energy. Okay, keep a healthy immune system. Those are the big players, okay? And I'm going to add the fifth. Don't get into fear and anxiety about this. We have always survived these things. Certainly don't worry about global warming because that's just not happening. I think you see that. But don't freak out about global cooling. We don't know how much it could be 5 degrees. It could be 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Not such a big deal. But it could be 36. We don't know because that's the variations. And we just have to wait and see. So I don't want to, again, be political, but this is, somebody from Israel sent me this. What we're looking at is record-breaking cold. You've seen that. I show you all the data. I show you the pictures. I show you the headlines. Record-breaking cold. And who's doing this? Mother Nature. Okay? It's really happening. And then you have the Greta saying, how dare you? How dare you what? Show me the truth. She's wanting to stop global warming. That's a good political thing. Again, you can think about the politics of it. It's not for me to outline the obviously implications. This is just a funny contrast. Mother Nature's saying, hey, we're in cooling, like it or not. And we have the fear-based, anxiety-based saying, how dare you tell me the truth? So you have been given the clinical evidence. You've been given the global cooling truth. That's just beginning. And I bless everyone that you actually take it to heart and begin to act in a way to protect you, your family, and your communities. Amen. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Om and Takiasin. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.